podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Passon and I am a relationship expert, international speaker and best-selling author of a book, Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news, TV, or on social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories, and listen to what real people think, do, or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything they said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. And here today, we're going to talk about something a bit different. We have Cath Lloyd, and we're going to talk about the impact of our decision or other people's decisions and what it has or how it affects our life, really. Hi, Cath.
Hello, lovely to be with you.
Thank you. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
So I am 55 years old. I'm a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother, a dog owner. And I've taught in adult education for over 25 years. And sort of since then, I have done my life coaching training, heavily involved with doTERRA essential oils. I've done my Reiki training. I'm currently doing my EFT or emotional freedom technique training, NLP. So I like to use my teaching experience, my life coaching experience, and general life experience, and how I've had to handle different things that have cropped up in my life to help other people.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because there was a bit of an announcement that changed your life.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Doesn't it always happen like that? Yes. I'd finished my degree in ceramics and glass, and I'd sort of come back home, and I didn't live much at home like most 20-something-year-olds. Even though you're still based at home, you're mostly at a friend's house or your boyfriend's house or whatever. And I was suddenly summoned home by my dad. Now, the last time I was summoned home, it was because they found out when I was 18 that I was sleeping with my boyfriend. So and the look on my dad's face was like as if I'd killed somebody.
I can imagine think, what have I done? What have I done recently that could go wrong?
That's it. What have I done now? So anyway, I go home and I'm sitting and I'm waiting, and my mum is there, but then she suddenly disappears, and I'm summoned off into my dad's little office, and I'm sitting there waiting, and it's July and it's a beautiful sunny day, and I'm just sort of gazing out the window, dreading what was going to happen. And yeah, my dad came in with a smile on his face, but you could tell it was a very strained smile. Mm-hmm. And it was very weird because I suddenly noticed that his hair was a little bit longer than usual. He wasn't one for, going to the barbers once a month like some dads are. But I just noticed, that it was curling a little bit on his shirt collar. And anyway, he sat down, he started talking about his feelings, and I can't go on like this, and something's got to be done, or else something more serious might happen. And I was thinking, oh, blimey, what on earth's going on here? Is he sick? Is my mum sick? Are they going to divorce? And I thought, well, if they were going to divorce, then my mum would be here. Yeah. So I couldn't really put it together. And then suddenly he just said, I can't live my life as a man any longer. I've agreed, your mum has agreed for me to undergo transgender reassignment to be a woman. And
obviously that was years ago as well. Let's not forget that, because now it's not very common, but it's spoken about. It's more common, shall we say?
That's it. I mean, we're talking about 1987. here. And I remember when I was a teenager, when we still had a black and white TV, that was a long time ago, that we watched a program on transgender reassignment. I thought, well, this is quite interesting, but a bit of a strange program to be watching as a family. And that was it. And so, yeah, I'd never heard of transgender reassignment other than that. I didn't know what it was called then when I was watching that program. And we just sat in silence for a bit. And then I laughed because I was so
nervous, isn't it?
That's it. It's a sign of laughter. Is a sign of shock. And I was so shocked because there was just nothing to indicate that this was going to happen. You know, my dad had a beard. He, you know, ran to keep fit. He did rock climbing. He did mountaineering, DIY. And back in the 1987, you know, that was a male, really, you know, a male thing to do, you know, digging the garden and all of these sorts of things. So it was a real shock to my system. And then I saw his face, and his face showed hurt that made me laugh.
I can understand that, you know, because obviously feeling rejected, at the same time, it's obvious it's a reaction.
And then I realized that actually he was deadly serious, and I stopped laughing. And then again, there was more silence, and he said, "Are there any questions?" And my head went into a complete fuzz because there was obviously lots of questions, but I just didn't know what they were at that time. And all of this time, my mum was doing mum stuff somewhere in the house.
Probably busying herself knowing
what was going on. And it just felt a very strange reaction because I suddenly felt, has the whole of my childhood been a lie? Has he never loved my mum? You know, what about me, his daughter, and my sister, so us two as daughters? You know, how has that fitted into his life? And so it was a very strange reaction, because although this was about him, it was, and I feel terrible now, but it was sort of about me, you know. And then eventually I left, and just as I was about to leave, it was, "Oh, Cath, you know, this is just between us and the family, so you can't tell anybody. Oh, you can tell Nick, who's my boyfriend, now my husband, you can tell him, but you can't tell anybody else. It's a secret."
And I think that the thing is, you know, there's an element when you find out something that, well, I suppose at the time you didn't like, but also something you're not expecting, it takes a bit of time to process the information and then your feelings about it.
Well, yeah, that's it, because I didn't know what to feel. You know, and as the weeks and months went on, I was very split, because I loved my dad, I respected my dad, and I trusted my dad, perhaps up until, to a certain extent, up until then. But then what was going to happen? What was our family going to be like? You know, was our family, which seemed a very solid family, suddenly going to be up in, you know, all upheaval, because I just couldn't then picture how we were going to be, what my dad was going to look like, you know, what was going to happen to my mum and dad's relationship, you know, all of this sort of thing. And then gradually I found out that my mum had known for 10 years and she'd had to keep that a secret for 10 years. And then that made me realize why my relationship with my mother, and my sister says exactly the same thing, was perhaps so strained, because my mother was trying to keep herself intact. She was holding on to this secret. She was trying to keep her marriage intact. She was so to protect, her husband. She was trying to protect us. She was trying to protect her job.
And she was probably trying to just work out on earth, the exact questions that you had. Was my relationship with this man a lie?
Well, yes, and was it? And also for my mother, did he really love my mother, or was this all just a cover-up?
Yeah.
To disguise, what was actually going on. And yes, the beard was there to disguise. I think that my dad did enjoy doing all those hobbies, but to be a man, or do very alpha male hobbies was put in place. But he also, with eventually talking and researching from my book, that he was hugely emotional when my mum was pregnant with us, even hugely emotional when his little baby brother was born, because there's 13 years between him and his youngest brother. And so, at 13, when his little brother was born, he was going through all of this hormonal upheaval himself, but then was also very emotionally attached to this newborn baby and was wanting to nurture this baby himself. And of course he couldn't do that, could he? Back in the early 1950s, that would have been absolutely horrendous. So he could take his little baby brother out for a walk in the pram, but could only do it very, very rarely. And he probably had a great big long story as to why he was walking his baby brother and not his mum, in case he met anybody, as he was walking around. So, cover-ups for many, many years, which then has a huge knock-on effect.
Then there's the announcement, because he's reached that point of self-acceptance, but for you, the journey starts.
And this is it. And I mean, we hear so much about gender reassignment and gender equality and, gender flexibility. And for me, and I know for a lot of people, that, we know that, the people making this decision of wanting to change their gender, they've lived with that for many, many years, and they have got used to it, and all they've wanted is to be the gender that they really feel. So my father, he knew at about the age of 5 that he was the wrong gender, or he didn't feel right. Obviously at 5 he didn't know what was going on, so all he ever wanted was to be the real him. But of course, we've suddenly found out, and we have to catch up.
Yeah. And this is the thing. I mean, obviously this is quite an extraordinary thing. It doesn't, it doesn't happen every day to every family, shall we say. But other decisions that we make, how we handle certain things, has an impact on others. And I don't think there's a way of getting that 100% right, because we all have different perceptions, different things, different whatever, but we need to be aware of that ripple effect.
Yes. But I think also, which makes it more difficult for the one having to tell or to open up, they're so caught up in having to tell that sometimes they're going to lose sight of whether they are doing it the right way. And
which is fair enough. Going forward, they need to check back. I give an example. My grandfather was killed in action during the Algerian War, and my dad was 6, his sisters were 5 and 3, or something along those lines. Either way, it wasn't really particularly well handled afterwards, and they didn't feel like they could talk about it, so they didn't, and it's really affected their life. So even for things that, are not as major as this, there's still a way to handle it at the point of announcement, but also afterwards.
Absolutely. And, you know, emotion, it can be very frightening, but you know, the BT advert is, you know, keep talking is the absolute key, and keep communicating in whatever way you can. And you've got to just battle through all of that emotion. And some people don't cry, and some people cry a lot. And when people cry, that can be actually very off-putting. People, oh no, I can't speak to them about it. But you've really got to battle your way through it as sensitively as you can, so that you can keep that communication system going and to keep the relationship going. I mean, you know, for us as a family, it was my mum who kept our family together. And, you know, and I hold my hands up to my mother for doing it, because she could have quite easily walked away. And I'm not saying that she didn't you know, think about it, because I remember having a conversations with her about it. But in the end, she decided she was going to stay. You know, she'd weighed up the options, but then she dug deep into her values, and her values were, I married this person because I love this person. And for me, marriage is for life. So I will find a way of supporting this person and keeping my marriage together and keeping my family together. And yes, I think it has caused huge impact on her, the ripple effect. But at least we can put our hands on our hearts and say, we are a family even today, and they still live together as companions today.
In your particular case, obviously there was a journey over the next few years, but it kind of really came back much later on, didn't it? You probably thought you had dealt with it, and then all of a sudden it really came back and you realised you hadn't.
Yes, absolutely. And so it probably took me about, you know, 27 years to come to terms with this. And the reason why one of the reasons why it took me so long was I was stuck in victim mode. Look what's happened. This is the effect it's had on me. I couldn't work out how to deal with it back in the 1980s. And, you know, you didn't send your kids off to counselling because it was a secret. The only people I got to speak to was my dad, who was going through it, and my mum, who was struggling with her own emotional baggage with it. And my husband didn't really know what to say about it. And eventually I did really plummet and hit rock bottom. And then I thought I dealt with it. And of course, you know, like with most people, you start to deal with the issues and it's all fine. And then you get to the really nitty gritty stuff and it becomes really, really hard work. And that's where it really starts hurting again. That's right. And that's when you occupy yourself with work and the kids and whatever else. And then one day, you know, I was starting to, you know, support my parents a lot more and, you know, starting to sift through all the mountains of paperwork, 30 years of mortgage statements and whatever. And I know it's not very eco-friendly, but the only way I was doing it was by burning the stuff. And I was just chucking all this stuff in. And then suddenly I saw my dad's MasterCard signature from back in the day when you had to sign a piece of paper. And it really, I just felt I was cremating him. And I suddenly had to
get it out
or find another one. And luckily I found another one, and I found one of my mum's as well, and I just folded them up together and put them in my pocket. But and I suddenly realized that I'd finally come to the end of my bereavement process. And this is how it has been, because even though he was still present in my life with a different image, I felt he was actually, had always been a different person. And so it was me letting go of my dad and really coming to terms with Joan instead. But it probably took me, all in all, about 27, 28 years.
And how is it now?
It's good. We've got a good, very, very good relationship. I mean, you know, my mum and Joan are in their middle 80s. They need a lot of support now. So that is my job now. You know, my 9-to-5 job in the week is supporting them and looking after them. And it's been great. But I just feel so guilty about all of that resentment I felt, unhappiness, me being in victim mode. And that is why I wrote my book, because I don't want other people to lose all those years of what could have been an even better relationship because of being in victim mode. You know, if you can get through the victim mode bit, then you can start to work on what is really, really going on inside.
Yeah, and at the same time, it isn't easy. You know, it's easy now because we're more aware, but especially back then.
Yes.
What is it like for your dad? Because obviously he's had, how old was he when he announced this?
So in his 50s.
In his 50s. So he's had 50 years pretending to be someone, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then 30 to 40 years actually being who he wants to be.
Yeah.
And how's that been for him in terms of an experience? Is he more confident? How is he in that? Oh, sorry. Yeah, you know what I mean.
And that's another thing. It takes you years to get used.
We're talking about that.
You know, it takes you years to get used to using the right, you know, pronoun. But no, don't worry about that. I mean, we were talking about it perhaps last year, you know, and she says, I don't regret any of that change. I don't regret, you know, marrying your mother. And he did really love my mother, you know, and having us as children, and he's very, very comfortable. I mean, and so there's no problem there. They've got their new marriage certificate now. That came about a year and a half ago. Unfortunately, my mum's got Alzheimer's, so when it arrived, she didn't really know what was going on. But, you know, me and Joan, we had a talk about it, and she had a bit of a cry. So eventually, you know, so that was good. And she's got her new birth certificate with Joan on it. And so that, you know, that sort of is the icing on the cake, so to speak, for her.
Does she regret not saying anything before?
Yes.
Yeah.
But, you know, like you say, it's when it's not open, how do you do it? You know,
I mean, attachment, isn't it? You're fearing losing all your loved ones in a way, especially back then, even more so than now.
Oh yes, and it's still a big fear, isn't it? You know, and it's understandable, but it's trying to be, all of us trying to be open, isn't it, about things? You know, I mean, the long term now is, you know, what is the long term effect of all this on the body? What is the long term effect on hormonal treatment for the rest of your life? So yeah, Joan is 85, she's still having hormonal treatment. What's the effect of that? What's the effect of 50 years of drastically wanting to be somebody else? How does that affect your hormones and your endorphins, and then all of the operations that you go through? How does that affect your long-term you know, mental and physical health? And this is sort of where we're at now, really. You know, and because there's a lot of, to put it crudely, pipe work that needs to be rearranged, you know, and I know that, you know, other male to female operations have had a lasting effect on the, you know, the bladder and the urinary tract and that sort of thing. You know, so there are complications. I mean, probably now the surgeons have got a very good system, and so the pipe work is a lot more efficient and a lot more effective. And this is what I mean about the long-term health and long-term complications.
Which isn't something that you actually probably think about when you think about doing such a thing. You think that once it's done, it's done. You don't think in 40 years' time I have to get it all rearranged, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, Joan is struggling with some form of Parkinsonism.
Yeah.
And, you know, Parkinsonism is affected by your dopamine levels. And so that, you know, that's another thing. And your dopamine is affected by anxiety and stress, which she probably struggled with for 50 odd years until she really became comfortable with being Joan. You know, and this is what I mean about the knock-on effect, and has this knock-on effect of my mother struggling with this for 10 years before anybody else knew, you know, has this had an effect on her mental health and had a contribution to her Alzheimer's?
Yeah. It's very, very, very good point. And I think that, you know, in any life, being true to yourself has consequences, whether it's standing for your values and your opinions or undergoing such a thing. And even for your mother, she's had to really think hard as to who she was to keep going or not.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, I was listening to something, you know, about, you know, a wife helping her husband go through reassignment, and then she was talking about, and this was, you know, this has been in the last few years, but I don't know whether I should have a sexual relationship with her.
Yeah, what does that mean?
You know, and that's it, you know. I mean, you know, my mother was in her 50s. She could have left, and she could have quite easily have started a new relationship with a new man. But, you know, our sex and our sex life has such an important part to play in our personal and intimate relationships, doesn't it?
Exactly.
You know, and that adds pressure on to, you know, relationships in all sorts of different ways, doesn't it? You know, but it's, you know, we all have, you know, like you said at the beginning, not every family has this experience, but we all have different sorts of experiences, you know, what I call shit cropping up in life. But, you know, we have to learn from these shitty experiences so that we are more prepared for the next one that comes along.
And I think this is the thing, you know, unfortunately, these things, whatever they are, we keep on cropping up at some point or another. It's just life. Yeah,
that's right. And, you know, I was sitting in the hospital with Joan this week, and, you know, she said to me, "God, Cath, you're so patient." And I said, "Well, I never used to be when I was little." And it was my sister who taught me how to be patient. And my sister had anorexia when we were teenagers, and I had to develop my levels of patience because, you know, meal times were absolutely horrendous. So learning to be more patient helped me when, you know, I was told about, you know, my dad wanting to change to be a woman. And what I learned about myself through all of that process, and through having to, in the end, manage my anxiety and stress, then helped me for the next shitty thing that came along that was actually bigger, you know. So, and then you learn from that experience to, you know, to help you with the next experience.
And did you experience, especially back then, I mean, I'm thinking now it's not necessarily easy, but especially back then, any form of prejudice? And I don't mean her as she changed, but you as the daughter of?
I didn't actually, which was really, really nice, but I was really worried that I would do. And the reason why I thought I would do was because I thought, well, if I laughed in my dad's face, what was going to be the reaction from anybody else? And so, you know, any new friendships I formed were very controlled.
Yeah.
You know, you'd talk about work or the kids or the very, you know, top level,
family,
you know, immediate stuff. Yeah, I had a new friend, and I met her at postnatal group. And our daughters, well, my daughter was 2 weeks older, her daughter was about 4 weeks old. But I didn't actually tell her till about 8 years into the relationship. Because you test relationships, don't you? You know, you test conversations. Can I talk about this? Can I talk about that? Is that a bit drastic? And this, that, and the other. And it just got to the stage where I had to just talk to her, because I knew I was having to come up to the stage where I'd have to tell my kids.
Yeah.
And if my kids didn't cope with it, then they'd got somebody else to go to besides me. And luckily she was in the same occupation, and she'd heard of this person who'd undergone transgender reassignment, and she did wonder whether this person was related to me, but hadn't, bless her, she'd never actually said anything to me. So that just confirmed what she had thought. And she was absolutely fantastic, and she just put her arms around me and she goes, Cath, it's all right, it's going to be okay. And it was just a massive, massive relief.
I can imagine. Right, Cath, we're getting towards the end of our time together already. What would you like your parting words to be to someone who maybe is in a similar situation or just struggling with making a big decision?
Oh gosh, so much. I want to say so much. I could talk for another 3 hours on it. To be really dig deep and be honest with yourself. It is really, really difficult. I know, I've had to do it. All right. So, and work out why it is important for you to have to make this change.
Yeah.
All right. And then to talk to the other people that are involved in your life, and be flexible with their thinking as well, because their reactions, because you might not like their reaction. All right, but it might just be an initial reaction, and they need to go away and think about it and then come back again. But you know, there's so many different forms of communication now. I've spoken to people about this. It isn't just a phone call. It isn't just social media. You can still buy a card, write a nice little message in it and put it through the post. All right. It doesn't have to be text and all of those things that can just be deleted and gone forever. So it's about using lots and lots of resources to keep communication lines going, because once communication starts to break down, it makes it more and more difficult to rebuild that communication and those relationships up again. And this goes to where you know, your line of work, Sophie, is relationships, you know, and because there's nothing like good relationships.
Exactly.
And there's nothing like a broken relationship. It is absolutely heartbreaking.
Well, Cath, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us today. And for everybody who listened to it, thanks for listening. And if you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe, give us a review, and more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.